I'll just start off with a little story that might make this relationship between mindfulness of Chitta and mindfulness of Dharmas a bit clearer. And I want to think of this story as a kind of, as it were, there's an angle of working on the mind which is, as it were, I don't mean this literally, but as it were negative, where you're working with a difficulty in your mind, you're working with the danger of your mind. It is striking, isn't it, that so much suffering is just caused just by an idea that somebody has. Some of them have been some of the worst atrocities in human history. It's just because somebody had an idea, a thought, which gradually became an attitude, a view, an ideology, which then got expressed in speech, which then managed to get other people to have that thought, which managed to get everybody to behave in a particular way. For instance, to give a dreadful example of it, the history of witchcraft, which is quite recent, historically recent. It's much more recent than you imagine. I think the last person to be killed as a witch was like 1756, which, it's not like medieval. And that's just because you have this idea that there is such a thing as a witch. It's just a thought. Actually, all you've got is old ladies in this case. And then as soon as you have that idea that an old lady might be a witch, anything they do can prove it. So if they're a bit doddery, that proves it. If they seem very sweet, it's because they're really covering their evil. If they're a bit grumpy, then they really are evil. If they deny it, well, that's interesting, they're denying it. If they admit it, well, you just kill them straight away. As soon as you have a thought like that there is such a thing as a witch, you can find them everywhere. I can't remember, it's a huge amount of old women were killed, murdered, because of an idea. So there's this aspect of our mind, massive aspect is too small a term, but massive forces in our mind which are incredibly dangerous. So I want to just touch onto that again, and then I want to talk about how actually one of the ways we work with that is create the other aspect of the mind which is incredibly positive. And it's that element I want to mainly focus on today. But I was remembering, as Charlotte City was talking, I think it was one of the early times I was teaching Life Full Attention. I think I'd just written the book and we did it for the first time or something. And I was having one of those horrible email arguments with someone. Actually, I was just living across the courtyard and he was living up there. And the emails were just... I could have just shouted out the window. And of course it was all his fault. I mean, he was actually objectively... Anyway, and I must tell you... Anyway, those things where you say, well, da-da-da, and then you say, da-da-da. I got foolishly into one of those. Eventually it was getting later and later, and I was supposed to go to this concert. I was going to a concert of Marlowe, which I like Marlowe very much. And I booked it like in a previous life, because you can never get in, I booked it so long ago. And I'd been really looking forward to going to it, And by the time I remember getting off at the tube at Liverpool Street and walking across to the Barbican, and in a complete, rage really. I couldn't think of a nicer word, but rage is about right. I mean, an English rage where nobody would notice. But and if I'd met him, I'd say, "Hello, how are you?" You never notice when you actually can. I was walking, I was feeling this kind of rage of indignation, really, as just feeling indignant, and that terrible sort of argument one can have in one's head. And I'd been either writing the book or I was teaching it. And I was thinking, this is it. This is your moment of Chitta. Here you are, this isn't Chitta. You are now in this kind of Chitta. In this case, it was a Chitta of indignation, of hurt, of an instinct to want to retaliate, to be right, to put that final put-down argument that would flatten him, in this case. Which you never can get to, can you? You never get to that. Usually you think of them about a week later, bring them another thing. Anyway, I just remember just thinking, this is what you've been writing about my trip. This is a chitta. This is it. I literally had to stop myself in the street and say, this is a chitta. What Dharma do you need to bring to it? What teaching that the Buddha is trying to communicate, what value is another word for it, do you need to bring to this mental state? So I remember it really strongly because it was quite, I sort of stopped and I literally said to myself, do you want to ruin your whole evening doing this? Do you want to go to this concert you booked ages ago that you've been looking forward to? Do you want to spoil the whole evening going over this argument? Is that what you're planning to do tonight? And in a certain sense I was. I was really steamed up, and you know what it's like, it just wants to perpetuate itself. And so I just really strongly brought to mind, you have to remember that hatred is never overcome by hatred, which is, a classic Buddhist valued Buddhist teaching. Hatred is never overcome by hatred. It will not work. What you're trying to do here, raging in your mind, sending an email back, it will not work. It will just create more of the same. It will just create more hatred. And it really was like getting myself by the sort of scruff of my neck and sort of saying, this is a chitta. What do you need to do about it? You know what you need to do about it. Do it, That's the relationship between chitta and Dharma. Here's the state of mind you're in. What do you need to do in that moment that's in your own best interests? Now, what I could do if I want to in that moment is just continue. And that's what, in a way, I want to do. My mind wants to roll across that whole argument once again, replay the whole thing. That instinct is very strong in us, isn't it? And you have to kind of step into it and just, in this case, I just said, is that what you want to do? Because you're going to spoil all that would have happened is like you spoil your evening, don't you? In fact, that happens is you spoil your life if you get into that kind of state. Isadora Duncan said that the best revenge is a happy life, which I thought was really good. The best revenge is a happy life. But what was striking about it is that because I'd been thinking about mindfulness a lot, because I'd been practicing it, I was able to stop it. And it was like I was being possessed by this demon of hatred and self-righteousness and so on. And I somehow managed to get out of it, pull it off me, if you see what I mean. And then I had this evening of incredible kind of bliss. For the start, I won't go on about too much because it's a very funny story, but I got to the concert, sat waiting for it to start. I thought, that's very funny, because I'd been to the night before, because it was a whole series of Mahler symphonies. I thought, that's odd, it was all set up exactly like it was yesterday. And I looked at the programme, I thought, that's funny, this is yesterday's programme. And suddenly I realised I bought the same concert twice. poor old person. This was the same concert I'd been to the night before. I'd taken a friend to this concert. We'd been to the night before, because I was in such a positive state, I thought, it doesn't matter. So I went out, just before it was about to start. As I got out, there was a young couple who were, someone was saying, look, I'm really sorry, there's no more tickets. And they looked really disappointed. I said, there they are, take them. I just gave them the ticket, and they were overjoyed that they could get into this concert, because you had to book it in a previous life. They went up. I felt even happier because they were so happy. And I had this wonderful evening of joy, which I could have just had an evening of just going through this argument. So that's what the relationship of Dharma to Chitta is. You cultivate enough mindfulness to really isolate. You are now in this mental state. Never mind what they did. I was just talking to somebody earlier, and I was saying, yes, but that you do this. He said, no, they did that, and then I did that. And I said, every time you say, because of A, I did B, that's not Buddhism. You have to say, I did this. Never mind what A did, what are you doing, So, the mindfulness of Chitta is saying, I am now in this state of mind. In this case, I was in a sort of self-righteous, hateful state of mind, really. Or I'm now in an anxious state of mind, or I'm now in a destructive state of mind. What do I need to do about it? what teaching do I need to bring in? Teaching is a funny word, really. It just means, what do I need to do wisely not to just run into the danger that my mind is running into? Because if I don't do it, my mind will just carry on running into that danger. How do I protect my mind from my mind? Yeah. So a lot of our mindfulness practice is about creating enough of space to realise I am now overtired, I need to turn the computer off. I can't think about that now because I'm tired and I feel a bit ill and I'm just getting into that negative thinking thing. Whatever it is that your mind runs into, really noticing that I'm now blaming someone for how I feel. I'm now, I've now lost perspective on what's happened to me. It's grasping that mental state, seeing that mental state, and then bringing to that mental state what you need to do now that will actually help your life flourish and grow rather than just go down the plug hole of reactivity. If you don't do that, your mind will just continue to run in its habitual way. Yeah? So that's really what we've been doing up till now, I think, is cultivating enough mindfulness of the body and Vedana and Chitta so that we know what state of mind we're in, so that we can own that state of mind, and then we can bring into that state of mind, okay, so what am I going to do now? And for many of us, the thing we need to do is turn off the computer and go to bed. Or the thing we need to do is say, actually, I can't discuss this just now. I can feel myself to be I can't valuably discuss it. I don't think I'm up to it. I can't think about that just now. What I can do now is to do something like this, yeah? That is the great art of your life, is how do you work with this machine of your mind? Because that machine never stops. I was talking in our group that the machine of our mind never stops. It's always involved. It's always kind of, I was saying in the group, it's almost like it's always wanting to eat things. And if you don't feed it positive things, it'll just eat junk food and then not be able to go to sleep and get into a complete state. And your mind will, because your mind is always wanting to be involved. It's always kind of eating the world. And if you're not careful, it'll just eat the world in a way that, in a negative way that it just hurts you and hurts people around you. And you'll regret that. If you don't regret it now, you will regret it at the moment of death. So we need to work with the mind, as it were, negatively, in that sense of creating enough space to grasp and see and know the mental state we're in, and then find a way of relating to it in a creative, productive, connecting way that we're calling the teaching, it's capital T. Yeah. Interesting, in Tibetan Buddhism, they have this thing called a purba, which looks like a dagger, and it looks like you're sort of to hurt somebody. What it is actually, it's based on a tent peg, and the metaphor is that you peg your mental state down so you can see it properly. This is me in that state of mind. It's not because of you. It's not because of A I did B. This is me in that horrible, stressed out state of mind. This is me in that arrogant state of mind. This is me in where I think I know best all the time. This is me when I want to be right all the time. This is me wanting to give my opinion. Pinning it down, seeing it for what it is, and then thinking, okay, bringing a dharmic reflection, bringing a teaching to mind. How do I need to relate to that in a way that's in my own best interest and in other people's best interest? If you do that strongly and well, you can turn an evening that would have been like a really negative evening into an evening that was actually just, even though all these things went wrong, I just completely was in this like bliss state the whole evening. I went with a friend and I felt all this love for my friend, and he was a bit annoyed because I just found it really funny. I just felt, the positives that came from it were much more than simply, okay, I've managed to deal with that negative. What I got was love. And I think this is also true of the mind. It's not that when you do that, it's not that when you break into a mental state and bring a teaching to bear on it, that you just then think, okay, fine, I won't do that anymore. What you end up with, if you really do it, is you end up with love. you end up with much, much more than you expect. Sometimes, particularly if it's quite a crucial situation, sometimes in quite a startling way that you hardly recognise. Yeah. But as I say, that if the other way of thinking is that the mind is always eating. It's never full. You can never put the mind onto neutral. You can never think, okay, well, I've kind of done the mind now and I can just forget about it. It's always involved. It's always eating the world. And so the other thing that we can do is give it really good food. We can point our mind more and more in a positive, valuable direction. Otherwise, our mind will want to just eat junk food. And it's just like junk food. Those negative states of mind we get into are just like junk food, aren't they? They're weirdly addictive. Like eating lots of crisps. As soon as you start on crisps, that's it. Nothing in the world ever seems to indicate a stopping of eating crisps, does it? All crispy body, or nuts. I find, I just eat nuts until I become a nut. So the other thing to do is to make sure that we keep on feeding the mind with positives. I was saying in my group, I was struck by something that Sangharakshita Bhante, my teacher, said, that he was saying that we all have a kind of poison tree in our life. Negative habits, often negative mind habits, destructive patterns, complacencies, impatience, irritability, a tendency to feel low, whatever it is. We've all of us got a poison tree in our life, and you need to work on that. You need to keep on trying to sort of manage that tree. But one of the things that struck me is he was saying you can never eradicate it. You can't get rid of it. You can't, get rid of the poison tree and not have one. He was saying, you need to manage it and you need to do what you can, but actually the most thing you need to do is plant another tree, plant a healthy tree, so that eventually the sort of horizon of your mind is dominated by a healthy tree, not a poison tree. If you're not careful, if trying to work with the poison tree of your mind can actually grow it, weirdly. You can get more and more preoccupied by your traumatic childhood, by your, in my case, my bullying brothers, by the fact that you didn't get into Oxford in a friend of mine's case. It was fine for me because nobody ever would have dreamed I'd get into such a place. So if you're not careful trying to sort of prune the poison tree, you can actually make it grow. You can start to focus on it. Most of it, we need to put our energy into planting a healthy tree, which means finding, the other metaphor is, finding better food for your mind, because it wants to eat all the time. And your choice is what to give it to eat. So that's the area of mindfulness I'm particularly wanting to focus on this evening, which is growing the healthy tree, you could say. Now, the two areas particularly I want to dwell on is nature and art, and that the primary quality you're trying to cultivate is receptivity. In many ways, the whole function of practicing mindfulness is so that you can be receptive, so you can be truly receptive and more deeply receptive, because actually that can take you all the way up to Buddhahood eventually. So what we're wanting is receptivity. So one of the ways in which we can feed the mind is to spend more time in nature. Remember that? It's like outside, windy, a bit cold today. In a way it's so simple, and yet we just forget to do it, don't we? Spend time in nature. So I met somebody this morning, we walked over to the Pavilion Cafe in the park, and it's the first time there was ice on the lake, and to see there was an Arctic tern perched on the ice, and it almost looked like, that's better. This is more like my world. All the birds on the ice. just the beauty of the world, the beauty of water. I often go to that cafe and there's a branch under the water just by the cafe, which every year these coots build a nest, and they come back to it once they're well grown up. They still come back to it, and it's nearly always sunk by then, and they just sort of stand on what used to be their house, just the sort of poignancy and beauty of nature. So a simple thing to do to give your mind better food is to spend more time in nature without listening to your iPod, without phoning somebody or texting a friend. Just be in nature. And what one is looking for is a kind of animistic attitude to nature, by which I mean that nature is alive and conscious. It's got a different kind of consciousness to you, but it's conscious. And by which I don't just mean the Arctic tern and the coots, I also mean the trees and the ground and even the buildings have a sort of consciousness. If you go deeper into the mind, if you go deeper in meditation, one's experience is that the world around you, your mind seems to participate in the world around you more, and the world around you has something of the quality of mind. It seems to be alive from its own side. And this is very different from what we tend to think of as, appreciation of nature. It's not also primarily ideological, although of course there's lots of ideological reasons why we need to be looking after the planet. It's something actually much deeper than ideology. It's something more like this animistic relationship to nature. I mean, it's because we've lost that we're quite happy to destroy the world, because we've lost our instinctive sense that the world is alive. And we've lost that because we've alienated ourselves more and more from our own life. So we've lost contact with the life around us, sometimes to a terrifying degree. So you're looking for that sense of a resonance of life with life. I remember a while ago I was on a solitary retreat, and at Vidrasana, the retreat centre, we have 2 solitary venues. I remember at the end just sitting out on the balcony, and I noticed that if I sat there long enough and didn't do anything, just sat very, very quietly, it was like the whole of the trees seemed to turn around towards me. You're wondering if I'm smoking for me. It's that ayahuasca thing that you're talking about. You did try it after all, but no. There's this incredible sense of participating in a world that is alive. I think most of us have lost that sense most of the time. It's quite rare to experience it. I only experience it rarely. So often we look at nature and think, yes, it's beautiful, but we're doing it in a kind of cognitive way. Even Coleridge said, I can see but not feel how beautiful it is. And that's often our relationship to nature, is I see but not feel how beautiful it is. But in this experience at the end of my solitary, it was like, you just wait. If you wait long enough, nature starts to turn towards you. I mean, actually, if you're quiet enough, literally nature comes back. I remember this one time sitting out there, and this hare just came all the way closer and closer, because I wasn't moving, just came closer and closer, and all the birds come back. You start to feel like St. Francis of Assisi, Nature comes back, because you're not sort of taking up so much space anymore. But yes, what you're looking for is this animistic sense of the natural world, that it embodies a kind of consciousness, and that if you go deeper in your own consciousness, you can start to resonate with that. But not, as I said, ideologically, not because you'd like to, or it's a good idea, it's good for the planet, which is actually weirdly another abstraction and another alienation, even though it might be important. What you're trying to get to is a felt sense of participating in a world that's alive, and alive like you, in an unimaginably different way to you. And the time I experience it most is on retreat, because I'm away from my computer mainly, and away from the business of life. And then the second thing I want to emphasise is art, the arts. It's funny, it's a shame we have this word, the arts. It always sounds immediately so snobby, so sort of arty-farty. the arts. It's always in italics, isn't it? Poetry. You think, I don't want to do that. That's awful. But the function of art is to deepen your mind. One of the great ways of being mindful is to use art, to use painting, drawing, sculpture, dance, poetry, and so on. And if you can attend to it deeply enough, and if the work of art is good enough, it can touch you in such a profound way that you can see why there's such a fuss about it. I mean, my little story about this, and then I'll come on to some more practical things, is recently I went with Jan of Archer, who I live with upstairs, a very good friend of mine. We got free tickets to go to see the Meistersingers at the Opera House. No, not the opera, the other one, what's it called? The Colosseum, yeah. And I know Wagner's operas well, at least the Ring Cycle, and really, really like Wagner, but I've never listened to the Meistersingers. It's supposed to be the most musical of the opera. I've read about it, but I've never listened to it. As it happens, I didn't get time to listen to it before I went to this performance of it. And I was going, remember, with a close friend that I live with upstairs. And we went to see his opera. He hadn't heard it at all either. So there we go. So we sit down, Act 1, and I was sitting there thinking, this is like rubbish. I was just thinking, is this right? Is this right? Like for a starter, it's a comedy. If anyone knows Wagner, the idea of Wagner writing a comedy is itself very funny. At the first I just thought, this is terrible, isn't it? And it was that weird experience where you sort of think, but hang on, everyone says this is supposed to be marvellous. And this is supposed to be one of the great pinnacles of music theatre. It's not even opera, music theatre and so on. And I thought, isn't it like rubbish? Isn't it awful? And then, afterwards I said to Jan of Archer, isn't it like terrible? And he would say, that was what I was thinking. I just thought it was so bad. And then, this is Wagner, so that means that's like an hour and a half of it being bad. So that's the first act, about an hour and a half. Then you go into the second act, you're thinking, okay, here must get better. And the second act was a bit better, but pretty bad, I thought. So we came out, literally, if I'd finished then, I would have thought, I really don't see what people rave on about it. It's it's like nonsense. Awful, absolutely awful. And then, because I was a friend, I could admit it. One of the problems with art is nobody can admit it. You just think, isn't this like rubbish? You usually can't admit it, and so we were happily saying that we couldn't get it. And then you go into so this is like most of your evening done already, because I can't remember how long, 4 hours or something like that, 4 or 5 hours. We went to Act 3, and as soon as Act 3 started, there's this, I think it's a double bass and cello started. It's very, and I thought this, I can't explain it, I felt this, hey up, this sort of, and it's beautiful, terribly sad music, and then then this beautiful song, and I could feel myself being transported. And then what the opera, I won't go on to, it's about the art object. It's about an opera about art, effectively. And in it, somebody writes a poem that's going to be a song, the master song. The Meistersingers means the master song. So you have to sing a song that you make up spontaneously and sing in this competition every year. And they get to this point where this man writes the master song, and he just sings this song, which is beautiful, and then writes it down. And then there's this quintet, I think it's 5 singers. They all just sat at the front of the stage, and he'd just written this song, and they sang this quintet. And as they sang, they pinned the poem that he'd written onto a clothesline. And as they sang, the clothesline went up, and the stage got darker and darker until all you had left is these singers at the bottom, and just this white sheet of paper, a spotlit, just this little square of light, the art object. And I can't tell you the effect. I was utterly transported. I seemed to, for the period of this quintet, I seemed to literally go up with it, with this poem into the air. I seemed to be transported beyond myself. And I burst into tears. I told a friend about that, and he said, you mustn't mention that when you teach about it. I burst into tears, like painfully into tears. And I think it was to do with the fact that the experience I was having was so beautiful, except for it doesn't have that italics in that the word beauty has. So valuable, so meaningful, that I felt this terrible sense of how often I wasn't in touch with that value and meaning. The weeping was to do with, oh God, this is what I mean, this is what I've always wanted, this is what I thought life was, and I'd forgotten it again. I'd forgotten it all over again. I mean, it was quite incredible. I mean, we walked home, both of us experienced the same thing. We walked, we were like drunken. I could hardly get home. I was like completely out of the world. And it's because the art can touch that kind of experience that why people have made so much of it, why people have gone on about it so much. It's because at your rare best, if you're mindful enough, if you're attentive enough, if you suspend disbelief enough, if you can go with it enough, and if it's good enough, it can take you right out of the world, completely out of the world, and sort of rebuild you, grow the good tree. So this week, what I want to suggest is that you, let's get the homework really clear. So the main thing I'm wanting to suggest in your home practice is that you're meditating every day. I want you to try to go on a retreat. Heaven knows we've gone on about it enough. But meditate every day. Try and go on a retreat. Do one of your mindful activities. It could be the mindful walk or the mindful moment or the breathing space. So do that, yeah. Meditation, one of the mindful things. And then see if you can, at some time in this week, and you might need to, if you haven't got time this week, put it in your diary, to spend more time in nature. Either on your own or with somebody else who's going to do it, so you don't need to talk to them if you don't want to. Go and just spend. I mean, at the moment it's like exquisitely beautiful. I woke up this morning to frost. You know, the secret ministry of frost, as Coleridge said. You know, all I needed to do is frost. I've got a poem going in. I've got to write a poem. I mean, frost. You know, it's so lovely. The frost in London, so unusual. So really try, either go for a long walk in nature without any equipment, or just sit somewhere and wait, keep waiting for nature to come back to you, to come to you. Yeah. And then see if you can improve your cultural diet. So do something which improves the things that you're putting into your mind, which often means stopping doing some of the things that don't. Like instead of flicking through your Facebook feed, like read a novel. I don't know whether you've ever heard of novels, but I mean, when was the last time you read a novel? So I'm reading at the moment Penelope Fitzgerald. I'm rereading her novels. If you haven't read her, she's like, go run out and buy The Beginning of Spring, because it's about winter. It's about winter in Russia for the revolution. Really, really funny, terribly tragic, beautiful thing. How does she do it? You know, read a novel, but basically improve your input. So what I'm going to do this evening, I'm going to give you some poems. Don't worry, folks, they're quite safe. I can't remember how many. And what I thought you could do is carry these around with you all week and see if you can read them 3 times. Poems are a form to be reread. They're not. It's a form that's written to be reread. It's not like novels. So see if you can read the poems that I've given you. See if you can read each one of them 3 times during the week. Basically try to do something in the week to improve your cultural diet. Yeah? So you might go to go to a gallery, go to a concert. See if you can improve your diet. Yeah? And then see if you can read these poems 3 times in the week. Just keep on turning them, and even more than that if you can. Because what you find is at first it takes you a while. You know, the funny things about poems, they don't go to the end of the page, and you know, you sort of think, oh, this looks a bit difficult. But then after you read them a few times, they'll start to feel, oh yeah, no, you get something. And they're all good poems, whether they're great ones, I don't know, but they're all good poems. They seem to be photocopied in an odd way, but never mind. Anyway, okay? And you'll get a copy of that at the end. So let's just break into pairs again. So what we're hoping, what you're needing to be doing is, how are you getting on with your meditation? Can you be doing more meditation? If you're doing twice a week, can you do it 3 times a week or 4 times a week? Can you do it every day? Are you doing your mindful walk? Can you come back to that if you haven't been? Or do you want to do some other mindful activity? And then where can you spend some more time in nature? Even if it's like you have to put it in your diary, and when can you improve your cultural diet, and how are you going to do that? Yeah. So 2s or 3s?